Okay, Katie, thank you for your patience. We're finally getting this done, whatever happened. I'm going to be reading through your paper and giving you suggestions as we go along. Okay, so mental health recently has become a popular topic around the world for people of all ages. As we learn more and more about mental health, we begin to see how serious it can become and how negatively it can affect people in their daily lives. You mean like problems with your mental health, right? It makes you start to ask yourself all these questions about mental health, such as, are mental health patients receiving poor quality treatment by their doctors? Is this lack of beneficial treatment because of health insurance providers? That's a great question. Or is this the reasoning behind why we are seeing more people become over medicated today? Also a great question. These are real questions that can change the outcome for someone with a mental health disorder. Well, the questions aren't going to change it. I think what you mean is the issues are going to affect people's mental health. I think. Okay. Wow. Very timely, important topic. Very important. One concern that Thomas Insel hears is lack of access, poor quality care, and desperate need for answers. From this article, Are All Children Over Medicated 2014. I'd like to know before you mention him, who is Thomas Insel? What is this article? Are children ever medicated? But okay, one concern that this person hears is, well, that's not one concern, that's a bunch of concerns, right? So maybe some concerns that Thomas Insel hears are lack of access, poor quality care, and desperate need for answers. I mean, those three are great things to pick out. Wow. Insel says children with behavioral emotional problems are being over-medicated by psychiatrists too busy to provide therapy. Wow, I mean, I've read a lot about, not a lot, but I have read in the past about being concerned that like pediatricians were overprescribing, but he's even saying psychiatrists are overprescribing. Wow. Too busy to provide therapy. Yeah, or the therapy is just too expensive, I imagine. At the request of parents, too busy to provide healthy home environment. Ooh, burn. What if Insel is right? Okay, and then since you've said that Insel is the one who's telling us this, if Insel is this is the only piece by Insel that you're going to discuss, which I assume it is in this size of paper, you don't need to put anything else. If you've let us know that this comes from Insel's piece, and also, as I said at the beginning, you probably want to talk just a little bit about, like, what is this piece you're looking at? Maybe where did it come from? Okay, now I'm lost. What if Insel is right? The people who are supposed to be helping our children are simply just giving them medications and hoping that the outcome will be positive because the drugs they're taking are supposed to chemically balance everything. Also, he speaks on how experiments don't have consistent or objective measures for mental disorders. Yeah. This makes it hard to distinguish between seeing a true increase in the number of children affected or having values or trends change in a diagnosis. Again, as long as we know that it's a Insel's article, you might put the page number there if there were a page number. Oh, that was exciting. Dishes settling in my sink. Okay, everything's just medicating. The doctor may be misdiagnosing and not looking at treatment alternatives. They're just medicating children for a quick and easy solution. Okay, so this one is looking at the feedback that comes from Thomas Insel in this article, Are All Children Over Medicated? Okay, in addition to doctors giving children a quick fix, well, you're trying to give children a quick fix, right? Because you're saying plenty of the time it doesn't work. Maybe I think that's what you said. There are other unethical practices being performed in this field. But sadly, there are. A study done by Michael Devitt that focused on kids nationally that have had or been told they have a mental illness shows a shocking number of children that have been diagnosed but did not receive the necessary treatment for the disorder. I feel like that could be a little smoother, but you're making a good point there. Devitt claims 1 in 6 U.S. children between the ages of 6 and 17 has a treatable mental disorder such as depression, anxiety, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Again, the first time that you mention this study by Michael Devitt, it's better here, right? A study done by Michael Devitt. I might also throw in, like, of where he is from or something. People often mention that because that's kind of important. But then you don't generally need to tell us the title of the article and the year every time. I'm glad it's such a up-to-date article. Okay, a question is to be considered is why, God, there's like a ghost messing with my dishes. A question to be considered is why are these families not able to receive the health care that they need? In the article, this feels like a new paragraph. In the article, Health Insurance and Mental Health Services, written by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Affordable Care Act made sure that individual and small group health insurance plans are required to cover mental health and substance use disorder services, which also includes the plans that are sold online. Health insurance and mental health services. So if they offer a plan at all, they have to offer some coverage for those things. I think that's what you're saying. Honestly, I don't know if that's true, but it sounds like that's what you're saying. It sounds like it should be true, maybe. As a result of this study, Devitt came up with a survey that consisted of 2 questions, and these questions were answered by parents that have or have had a child with a mental disorder. Just in general, as you're going along here, I love the way you earlier raised this question about like diagnosis. You know, you're like basically like, well, how do we measure this, right? And I would just throw out for consideration, like this is also the case with physical illnesses, you know, I mean, that in many, many cases, we don't have like really clear cut. I mean, there are some situations like, are you anemic? And they do a blood test and like, are you anemic? Are you not anemic? You know, do you have enough iron in your blood? But for a lot of physical illnesses too, doctors end up just making their best guess based on, okay, you have this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, with those going together and everything I know about you, I think it's this. So it's not just mental health that is hard to diagnose. I mean, I feel like that's why people are doctors, and I'm not. But particularly focus on, which as you brought up is really important in mental health, people are extra skeptical about that. They're like, oh, they just, you know, kind of made these things up and there's no real criteria for them. I'm like, well, I mean, that's true, but also there's no real criteria for a lot of diseases, including physical things. Because human bodies are complicated. Oh man, I went off on a tangent. Okay. The questions, because yeah, I was very interested about these questions. The questions consisted of Devitt asking if Dr. O had ever told families, got a little typo there, that their child has a mental health disorder, and if the answer, typo, was yes, does the child currently have that condition still? Again, you don't need to say the title as long as that's the only thing you have by Devitt. Oh, and there's the quote. So I might introduce that with something like, according to the study. I'm a big according to fan. I have to like edit that out of my own work because I want to do that every time. Nationally, 49.4% of children with a mental health disorder did not receive necessary treatment or counseling from a mental health professional. Okay, and again, we know where that came from, so you don't have to tell us every time. That seems like a really good quote. While the 49.4% of children with a mental health disorder didn't receive help, what about the adults? Are they suffering from the poor quality of our healthcare system as well? Lovely transition. Okay, let's talk about adults. Excuse me. This is fortunately seems to be the case. In the past, insurance companies could restrict people for certain medical conditions. I think what you mean is they could keep them from getting a policy, like they would refuse to let them buy a policy. They're not really restricting them, they're just kind of refusing to serve them, sort of. Okay, anyway. According to the article, Health Journal, see, there's your recording, I like that. These plans must comply with mental health and substance abuse parity requirements as set forth in the MHPAEA, meaning coverage for mental health and substance abuse services generally cannot be more restrictive than coverage for medical and surgical services. Wow, that's complicated. And I have no idea what that means. Maybe you have a better idea. With all this being said, within the health insurance companies, the Affordable Care Act and MHPAEA should allow people who are covered and can afford copays copays to do what? Should allow people who are covered and can afford copays and their deductible should be able to receive the treatment they need. Okay, so should allow them to receive the treatment they need. When I stumble, I'm like, I bet you can make that better. Okay, according to the implications of Affordable Health Care Act for Mental Health, Written by Robin L. Goldman and Matthew Vail. See, there you did it. That one's lovely. There are still steps that need to be put in place to ensure everyone gets the coverage they need and can do so despite whether they're diagnosed or not. Ooh. Now you're talking about diagnoses. And well, I guess you sort of mentioned that before. I don't feel like you really clearly pulled that through, though. You're talking about diagnosis and then coverage. Also, there should be no age restriction who gets this coverage from insurance companies. Golden and Vail state the proliferation of health insurance exchange and those states who have state-specific Medicaid expansions, which will dramatically expand coverage for those not eligible for Medicare. They state that the proliferation... You didn't tell us what the proliferation did. Got like a lot of noun there. And no action. Okay, so they state that the proliferation, we need to know what happened with that, but then you come to, they tell us that, love that comma there. A lot of people struggle with putting a comma there. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimated that no more than 2 million of the new HIE enrollees are older than the age of 55. No more than 2 million of these new people are older than 55. This must have something to do with being eligible also for Medicare, right? And are you eligible for Medicare when you're, I think, 65? Because I think my mom has it now, but I'm not sure. The implications of horrible occurrence from that. This proves that mental health disorders can follow you if not treated or someone else first notices it. So the disorders can follow you if not treated. I mean, unfortunately, I think they're going to follow you whether they're treated or not a lot of the time for the chronic kind of situations. Not that you can't be better, but okay, so they can follow you if you're not treated or someone else first notices. And I'm not sure what you mean there at all. Vail and Golden tells us the ACA will not allow insurance companies to deny people coverage with a pre-existing condition. Yes, absolutely true. Overall, the goal should be targeted. Overall, the goal that should be targeted is how we as a country and the world can help all of these people suffering from mental illness, as well as ensuring each individual is getting access to the best affordable care they can receive. Insurance companies will treat people with all conditions fairly. I mean, I guess so. I don't know if you really exactly defined fair, but the last question we should be asking is how expensive will this all be to ensure the best for these children and adults? Will this money be added to our taxes, or will this all really help or just make each state more in debt? When researching information around our mental health care crisis, I utilize sources that had websites with .orgs and .edus. EDUs are my favorite, so I knew I would be more info and knowledgeable information on the topic. I also chose articles that specifically answered the questions I had, but also left me asking more questions so I could keep researching. Lovely, and your work's cited. I'm not going to look real in-depth at it because I only have a couple minutes left, but that looks, upon first glance, to be okay. DHHII. Cool. Okay, so questions I have for you going forward. You initially began by wanting to know, are mental health care patients receiving poor quality treatment? And I think you came to the conclusion that yes, they are. Sorry, I'm back at your first paragraph. This is a lack of beneficial treatment because of health insurance providers. I don't feel like you really got into that. I mean, you did talk about how they have to accept people now with Obamacare or whatever we want to call it. But that's only one aspect of this, and so I was kind of curious about other aspects of it. Or is this reasoning behind we are seeing more people become over-medicated today? Okay, in my last very few seconds, maybe in your next paper, you might want to go into, or maybe to add to this one, you might want to go into these issues of just the fact that people have medical insurance does not mean that they can afford their copays, does not mean that they are near enough to any kind of therapy or psychiatrist to do any kind of continuing work. There are many, many people in rural Kansas, for example, who are not close enough to do that. And Kansas is a state that doesn't have Medicaid expansion, so there are plenty of people in Kansas who have no health insurance at all still. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for your paper, and I hope I gave you some good ideas.